Good evening, preppers. I don't know if it's like this where you're at, but here in Michigan, it is hot, extremely hot. So time is short. I love my timer. So much so that, of course, we moved up to Michigan to stay out of the heat. We were living in Florida before we came up here and living in a world of air conditioning constantly. We wanted to come to a place where we didn't depend on air conditioning all the time. And this last year has been exceedingly hot. In fact, one of our really good friends, you'll actually see her on the channel sometimes, is Michigan Daffodil. She lives about an hour from here. She said she's never seen it this hot before. And, if you're in Florida, you can actually see the haze sometimes. And we saw that up here. And it's difficult. Even more difficult, our well went out again. It's one of those things where it's a constant thing. So I think at this time we're not going to have a choice, but we're going to have a new one drilled. That way we can actually put a manual one in, which is, in my opinion, a blessing in disguise because, you don't want to dish out the money unless you have to. But if we're going to have to, we may as well get what we want, All right, so when we talk about heat waves, and we're talking about electrical shortages, power problems, power outages, and blackouts, and of course, water problems, drought all over the West Coast, and the civil unrest and everything that's going on, it's a culmination of things. You could almost even say we're heading into what we'd call maybe a perfect storm. I don't know if it usually pertains to this, but it sounds good. We have a perfect storm of chaos enveloping not just the United States, but all over. Europe is burning right now. We have extreme hot temperatures. And of course, mainstream media has said, oh, look, see global change or global warming, all that stuff. And maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I don't think it is. I think it's actually orchestrated and planned because our military under the HARP program, declassified documents show they can control weather, and that was like decades ago. So trying to reinforce their global warming agenda, they could easily make things, turn up the heat a little bit for everybody. But I always say, if you believe that or not, that doesn't matter. It's regardless, not irregardless, as a lot of people have warned me. Regardless, because our prepping is still the same, practically speaking. We have to prepare for this. And I'll tell you, there's nothing more educational than trying to prep when you don't have water or when the power goes out. And that's why I always stress, if you're a prepper, take a day to make your own shit hits the fan day or weekend or a week where you can only depend on your supplies that you've stockpiled, the water you've set aside, and everything else, because you'll never know what you need until you actually practice with it. Okay, so this is probably not the first perfect storm we've seen in these type of situations. And myself, I remember in the 70s, New York City having a serious problem with the same kind of thing going on. So I don't have an article for you this time, but instead it's a Wikipedia, which of course we know is all completely true, but I don't know. I don't think anything here has been changed, but it does talk about the New York City blackout of 77. And I remember this as a kid. And I remember that summer was an exceedingly hot summer, very hot. And if you go down, they actually believe or saw that there was lightning storms that actually started the problems as far as some of the different power plants. And because of that, they had power reductions. They started shutting off different power. And then, boom, the power failure happened. Now, the power failure in itself took over numerous sections of the different bureaus of New York City. And all the crime just skyrocketed, leading to riots and everything else. But one of the things I remember specifically, going back to 77, I remember this right here. Some pointed to the financial crisis as the root cause. Others noted the hot July weather. They were in the middle of a brutal heat wave. I remember this. I was just a kid, but I remember this specifically, that this heat wave that was going through was causing this to happen. And I think that's probably the reason I bring up this video, because when we talk about heat waves, when we talk about all the things that are happening right now. And I will tell how hot it is here in Michigan. I mean, we're talking about, listen, don't laugh at us. We're in Michigan, like 91 degrees. And people are like, 91, that's nothing. I know, but in a life where there's no air conditioning, or we actually have a little portable one that, in our living room, it takes the edge off. But this is not a place where you typically find air conditioning. And you can't use like evaporative coolers, swamp coolers up here. Down south, when we lived in Florida, we would have like a couple months out of the year that were nice. Like when we used to live in Pensacola, and that's how it was in Pensacola. And 9 or 10 months, you were living in air conditioning. You go from the air conditioning in the house and run to the car and the air conditioning in the car. Then you go to the store, air conditioning in the store. And that's how you survived. But understand that, and this is what I remember from the blackout, maybe it was my dad telling me this or just simply things I've read, was one of the reasons they had the blackouts too was because of the brutal heat wave in July. that all the New Yorkers were turning on their little portable air conditioners and it was too much for the grid to handle also. Is that what happened? It's hard to say. But again, it doesn't matter. But what happens is we take a situation where there's already civil unrest, a situation where people are already uneasy about the situations that are happening. There's problems with the government. There's problems in politics. We already have civil unrest. And the list goes on and on and on. And now let's cut off the air conditioning. Not even just cut off the power, but let's cut off the air conditioning and the power too, and the water in some cases also. And let's kind of see what happens. Now, I'm not going as far as saying that the 77 blackout was orchestrated, although I would not put it past the government for doing these kind of things. They love testing these things out. But what's it going to be like for this summer? What's it going to be like as we go from July into August? And I actually heard news from a friend that in the power grid, there's numerous places where they're like, we know the power grid's going to go down here. And we're not talking about just controlled blackouts. And I can't substantiate that for you. I wish I could. I'll try to see if I can get actual inside information for you later, but take that with a grain of salt. But either way, with the Hoover Dam problems, and not just the explosion part we talked about that yesterday, but the fact that the water levels are so low that the Hoover Dam electrical parts are beginning to shut down. The nuclear power plant here in Michigan shutting down. And all over the country, we are simply having less electricity available for everyone during a summer that actually is exceedingly hot. What's it going to be like later this summer? What's it going to be like next year or the year after if climate change, global warming, orchestrated global warming, however you look at it, continues? They're not going to be able to handle these things, and our nuclear power plants are already at capacity and beyond their age they were supposed to be alive, as more are even shutting down because they're too old. We are heading for a super storm of problems. And I'll tell you, because even in our family, as far as like a family goes, as my wife and I, Ashley, and we have 8 kids, and we are like the Waltons. We just love each other. We love playing games. We love hanging out together. And that's why we have a family channel too, by the way, which you can watch. It shows what it's like, because no matter how chaotic the world is, and I get caught up in it sometimes too, but no matter how chaotic it is, you have to have that balance and actually have the love and family also. And that's what we have. But you know what? Let's take out the air conditioning. Let's take out the water and let's make it nice and hot. Yeah, even in our family, we get a little squabbles going on. And that's what happens when you get really hot. You get miserable and you get cranky, and the cranky leads to being pissed off. And next thing you know, you have riots. That's how I see it anyway. Maybe you see it differently. But as we see this summer continuing and heat waves continuing, not just here, but in Europe as well, and we're seeing power going down, and let's add in a whole bunch of air conditioners, and that it's going to cause even more blackouts. And I'm wondering if that's one of the major things that's going to lead to civil unrest. Not to mention, of course, elections coming up soon. All right, well, there's a little food for thought, because in my mind, I like trying to make connections there. And just like we actually had this giant boiling pot of chaos in the 70s in New York City, I'm seeing the same type of boiling chaos right now that's happening in the United States and Europe too. I'd like to have your input on that also. All right, thanks for watching.